Hello to you all. I met Monique for the first time yesterday evening and Susan Edward just now. And actually, I thought I would ask the sort of questions that I would ask were all of you not present in the room, which is the kind of shop talk that you sometimes have with writers when you meet them for the first time. And I felt actually this is a question that also interests everybody. And so I'm going to moderate this event with a very light touch and propose that since we have only about 35 minutes, that each one of us tells the audience something about your journey as a writer, where you started, how many books you've written, how you came to writing novels, and then perhaps read a little from whichever book that you wish to, and that way we will go through all of us and we'll leave some time for questions at the end. And Monique, I'm going to start with you. Please, go ahead, take it away.
All right. Is this on?
Yeah.
Yes, yay. Well, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Well, my journey as a writer, I didn't begin my adult life and career as a writer. I was an attorney. And that was giving me facial twitches and and other stress-related ailments. And so I needed to find something to return to the joy that I felt prior to being a lawyer. And what I had always loved doing was to write. And so it began with a short story that just wouldn't end, and that became my first book, which was called The Book of Salt. And then the second book was called Bitter in the Mouth, and the book that just came out this month actually is called The Sweetest Fruits. And if it's not already clear, there's a lot of food in all my books, but not in the way that you would expect. We'll leave it at that. What were the other?
Yes, I'm sure you're going to read in a bit, but I meant to ask you, how hard was it at the beginning? Because it seems to me in the course of our lifetimes, literature has become a bit more professionalized, especially in America.
Yeah.
And I take it from a little bit I know about you that you belong more to the amateur tradition where without ever having studied writing, you start to write and then you have to submit blind to the industry and hope that,
Right.
you're taken up in a way.
Right. Yes, I instead of getting an MFA, I got a JD. And so I didn't have the same sort of access to those sort of connections that I think the reasons why people in the US go for an MFA, to have the mentorship and to have, the colleagues that can sort of tap you and sort of lead you towards agents and publishing houses and so on. So for me, I wrote, like I said, that short story, and I was living in New York. I live in Brooklyn. And I had a friend who was working as an assistant to an editor at Penguin. And she gave me a list of agents. She said, I like the authors who are represented by this agent. You should submit your work and see what happens. And I did, and I was very, I don't think I realized what a long shot it was, because this really, truly was not my milieu, right? And that's how I found an agent. And from that point on, my legal career disintegrated. And the rest, the priorities changed, I should say.
But that's very good to hear, because usually it's the other way around. And literary life is not what thrives, and people drift away, but you've drifted in. So why don't you tell us something about what you're going to read from, and then let us hear something by you.
Okay, wonderful. The Sweetest Fruits is it's the life of, or rather, it's the story of a Greek-Irish writer named Lafcadio O'Hearn. And he lived from 1850 to 1904. And and he is known as an expert, or he was known as an expert on Japanese folklore, ghost stories, and fairy tales, and other sort of just Japanese culture in general. And the story is told from the point of view of 3 women in his life. The first is his Greek mother. The second is his first wife, who was a African-American woman whom he met in Cincinnati. And the third voice is his second wife, who is a Japanese woman. And there's actually a fourth voice in there, which is his first biographer as well, and also a woman. But before I begin, I'm going to read just from the very first pages of the novel. And actually, can you tell us, do you want like a 2-minute reading, or you didn't give us guidelines?
It depends on how fast anyone reads, So yeah, so I hesitate to tell a very slow reader that they'll get much less material than the ones. Yeah,
well,
2 or 3 minutes. Yes, that's good.
Okay. I was going to read you the whole thing. Okay. So this is Rosa, his mother. And it's set in 1854. And she's on a ship that's taking her, on the Irish Sea, I should say, and it's taking her from Dublin back to the Ionian Islands. And she has left Lafcadio Hearn, who at this age is 4, and she's never going to see him again. And she's telling her story to a letter writer in the hope that one day this letter will find her son as an adult and will explain to him why she did what she did. Patricio Lafcadio Hearn was born hungry. I could tell by the way that he suckled. From the first time that his mouth found the nipple, he was not wont to let it go. His eyes opened and unblinking, watching and daring me to tug myself from him. All babies were born with an empty stomach, but not all of them were born with such need in their eyes. His elder brother, Giorgio, my first blessed one, had to be coaxed and tricked. The tip of my little finger dipped in honey was what he took first into his rosebud mouth. Then, patiently, I would guide him to my breast, where honey and milk would mix. This soothed him, but it was not enough to keep him. Giorgio shared my milk with Patricio for less than 2 months. I beg of you, do not call him George and Patrick. Those are not their names. Their father's language is not mine. Even before I was certain that there would be a blessed second, I suffered his appetite, which was growing in me swift and strong. Patricio demanded of me the small things from the sea. Whelks, which no one sold because the people on Santa Maura, same as on Sarago, the island where I was born, would not buy something that they could gather like pebbles at the shore. In the mornings, I would leave my first with old Iota, the only woman on our lane with no children of her own, in order to bend over the wet sand until I felt lightheaded or until my basket was full. Patricia wanted the whelks boiled, their spiral of flesh removed one by one. He allowed me olive oil and lemon juice with them, but never vinegar. When there was no longer a doubt and whelks became too difficult for me to collect, Patricio insisted on cockles, of which there were sellers, because cockles were found on the sandbars far from shore, where the tide came in like the hand of God. To lose your life for mere cockles is a curse as old as the sea. And may you never hear it spoken. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. Very well done. Edward, we get to you now. And I noticed that just like Monique, your book is set in the past, and I wondered whether what sort of work, while you're talking about it, I would like to know, even for myself, what sort of work one has to do to recover a historical figure and regenerate the world behind them?
Too much. Far too much. Actually this is the first time this novel of mine is called Little, is actually about the life of Madame Tussaud, who made all the famous waxworks. I will never write about a real person ever again. It's very inconvenient to have to be truthful sometimes. And I found this very frustrating. And it took me 15 years to finish this novel, basically because real people kept getting in the way. I want to say the reason I started writing this is because when I left university in England, I should backtrack a little bit to say that I went to a naval boarding school in England. I was supposed to be in the Royal Navy like my father and my father before me, but I didn't make it. I escaped, and now I'm here. And I went to university and I studied drama, which my parents weren't particularly impressed by. And then I took a series of really bad jobs that absolutely set me up for life, and that sort of free fall from university. I worked as a stage door keeper in the West End. It was just the best job. I had the keys to a West End theatre. That was me. I opened it up, and I locked it up at the end with all the ghosts inside it. And I was a archivist for a plastic surgeon, and I also worked in Madame Tussauds waxworks, and it was the best job. Because you went in there and you felt such sympathy for the wax figures. They were so nice. All the humanity was so noisy and unpleasant. But the figures themselves, they were so still. They had such poise. And I fell in love with them. And I fell in love with Madame Tussaud. The last waxwork she made was of herself. She's a tiny little mollusk of a woman. Staring out, big nose, big chin. And I went, who are you? And she was clearly in charge of all the other figures through all history. This woman is the woman you pay attention. Nobody else. And she became I thought, my God, this woman is a folk tale character. And she's like a myth. And so I desperately wanted to write about her and about her story. And it took me a long time to get to it. And then it took me a very long time to, I don't know if you felt the same thing, actually dealing with the kind of actually historical figures that actually you can dealing with history, that you can actually you have to get to a stage when you've done enough research that you can forget it. And so you say to yourself, where is the story? What am I actually trying to write about? And I realized that what I was trying to write about was this survivor's tale. And she went through the French Revolution and came out with it, the other side, in 3D, in wax, saved. For you, the French Revolution. She had Louis XVI's head in her lap, and Marie Antoinette's. She touched history. She was the history woman. She collected it like a sort of camel in a hump. And she took it from Paris in full color, 3D, to London and showed it. Before they just had illustrations. Went, here, it's the French Revolution. Have a look. Cost you. Give me your money first, and then you can see it. So
I think we had an extremely good pitch for your book. I'm just waiting for you to back it up now with some real
all
writers.
right. Yes, okay, thank you. So I will get on with it. I will read just a couple of pages right from the start, just exactly how it begins. It's in her voice. She's narrating her own story. Chapter 1, in which I am born and in which I describe my mother and father. In the same year that the 5-year-old Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart wrote his Minuet for harpsichord, in the precise year when the British captured Pondicherry in India from the French, in the exact year in which the melody for Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star was first published, in that very year, which is to say 1761, whilst in the city of Paris, people at their salons told tales of beasts and castles, and men with blue beards and beauties that would not wake, and cats in boots and slippers made of glass, and youngest children with tufts in their hair, and daughters wrapped in donkey skin. And whilst in London, people at their clubs discussed the coronation of King George III and Queen Charlotte, many miles away from all this activity, in a small village in Alsace, in the presence of a ruddy midwife, 2 village maids, and a terrified mother, was born a certain undersized baby. Anne Marie Groschholz was the name given to that hurriedly christened child, though I would always be referred to simply as Marie. I was not much bigger at first than the size of my mother's little hands put together, and I was not expected to live very long. And yet, I survived my first night. I went on, despite contrary predictions, to breathe through my first week. After that, my heart still kept time, without interruption, throughout my first month. Pig-headed, pocket-sized thing. My lonely mother was 18 years old at my birth, a small woman, a little under 5 foot, marked by being the daughter of a priest. This priest, my grandfather, made a widower by smallpox, had been a very strict man, a fury in black cloth, who never let his daughter out of his sight. After he died, my mother's life changed. Mother began to meet people, villagers who called upon her, and among them was a soldier. This soldier, a bachelor somewhat beyond the customary age, possessing a somber temperament brought on by witnessing too many appalling things and losing so many soldier friends, took a fancy to Mother. He thought they could be happy, so to speak, being sad together. Her name was Anna Maria Waltner. His name was Josef Georg Groschholz. They were married, my mother and my father. Here was loving, and here was joy. My mother had a large nose in the Roman style. My father, I believe, had a strong chin that pointed a little upward. That chin and that nose, it seems, fitted together. After a little while, however, father's furlough was over and he returned to war. Mother's nose and father's chin had known each other for 3 weeks. To begin with, for always, there was love. The love my father and mother had for each other was forever present on my face. I was born with both the Waltner nose and the Groschholz chin. Each attribute was a noteworthy thing on its own and nicely gave character to the faces of those 2 families. Combined, the result was a little ungainly, as if I were showing more flesh than was my personal due. Children will grow how they will. Some distinguish themselves as prodigies of hair growth or cut teeth at a wonderfully young age. Some are freckled all over. Others arrive so pale that their white nakedness is a shock to all who witness it. I nosed and chinned my way into life.
Very riveting indeed. I was once at a residency, the first I ever went to, where one of the writers caused so much havoc romantically that when he left, somebody else said to him, you came here as a writer, you're leaving as a character. And I feel like saying the same thing about you. You should be written up yourself, Edward. Maybe as a Christopher. Okay. It struck me while I was listening to the two of you reading that isn't it so wonderful that the novel is such a hospitable form? It allows you to invent everything from scratch, but you can also take a bit of scaffolding from history, a person or a period, and then invent on top of that, and often that's very liberating too. And Susan, I wanted to ask you how you came, if you want to be a writer, it's not automatic that you gravitate to the writing of novels. So what was it about novels that made you decide that this is where you wanted to express your own vision of the world and of history?
First of all, I just want to say I love the passion that you you exude regarding Madame Trousseau. I have a similar history to you, Monique. I didn't study literature or writing. I was a biologist. Even though I think I always wrote, when I was a child, I wrote a lot of Arabic poetry. And, but I never considered myself, I didn't even really know that or imagine that writing was something I could do, or that it was a profession that was accessible to me. It was kind of like, wanting to be the Queen of England. Being a writer was, akin to that. So all Arab families think that, there's two professions in the world. Well, not all Arab families, but you're either a doctor or an engineer, and anything else is just kind of ancillary. So I went to medical school, and I was working as a biologist for a drug company in research for many years, and I started writing political commentary in newspapers out of just frustration because following the second Intifada. Because I realized that what the media was reporting wasn't at all what I knew to be true. So started out as letters to the editor and then as op-eds, and I was surprised that editors kept asking me for more stuff. So that was actually my kind of first conscious realization that, I can write. So it was well into my 30s. And I also became somewhat of a political activist, and in the year 2002, Israel committed a massacre in Jenin, and I went there. We had a lot of friends on the ground, and I ended up being one of the first international eyewitnesses to the immediate aftermath of that. So I had a lot of these really haunting and traumatizing images in my head when I returned. And it was post 9/11, and the atmosphere was really quite hostile to people like me, with the last name like me, and a combination of those two things, 9/11 and my political activism, ended up sort of getting me laid off from my job. And I found myself a single mom with very little money, no income, and no family in the area, sort of, bewildered by my sudden circumstance. And the only thing I really could do was to get up super early the next morning and start writing about Jenin. And what I thought initially was going to be just sort of a nonfiction kind of diary. I just kept writing and writing, and at some point I realized I was writing a novel. So I mortgaged my house, I went into massive debt, I continued to write, and a few years later I did go back to work, but I had this novel, and there was a whole journey of getting it published and getting an agent that took about 8 years. But it became an international bestseller, and it was translated into 28 languages. And it continues to, the sales have never, to this day, have not diminished. And it's become something of a classic in Palestinian literature. So my scientific career, likewise, sort of faded into the breeze, and I wrote another novel following that, and that I'm going to read from, and I have a new novel that's coming out next August. So,
Please go on. Yes.
okay. So just a bit about this story. It's most of the novels I write are women's stories, and this one is likewise a story about multiple generations of women in a single family, and it takes place in Gaza. The first chapter, well, every chapter actually opens with a sort of vignette from a little boy named Khaled. Khaled, following the 2014 Israeli attack on Gaza, goes into something called locked-in syndrome, in which he can sort of perceive the world around him, but he cannot interact with it. In other words, he can't move, he can't, the most he can do is blink his eyes, and he sort of refers to this place as the blue, and which is where the title of the story comes from, the blue between sky and water. And there are a few chapters that are entirely in his voice, and that's what this first chapter is. Of everything that disappeared, Kinder eggs are what I miss the most. When the walls closed in on Gaza and adult conversations became hotter and sadder, I measured the severity of our siege by the dwindling number of those delicate chocolate eggs, wrapped in thin, colorful foil with splendid toy surprises incubating inside the eggs on store shelves. When they finally disappeared, and the rusty metal of those shelves stared back naked, I realized that Kinder eggs had brought color into the world. In their absence, our lives turned a metallic sepia, then faded to black and white, the way the world used to be in the old Egyptian movies when my teta Nazmiye was the sassiest girl in Beit Arras. Even after the tunnels were dug under the border between Gaza and Egypt to smuggle the things of living, Kinder eggs were still hard to come by. I lived in these times of the tunnels, a network of underground arteries and veins, with systems of ropes, levers, and pulleys that pumped food, diapers, fuel, medicine, batteries, music tapes, Mama's menstrual napkins, Rachel's crayons, and anything else you can think of that we managed to buy from the Egyptians, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The tunnels undermined Israel's plans to put us on a diet, so they bombed the tunnels, and a lot of people were killed. We dug more that were bigger, deeper, and longer. Again, they bombed us, and even more people were killed. But the tunnels remained, like living vasculature. Once, Israel convinced the United States and Egypt to install an impenetrable underground steel wall along the Rafah border to cut off the tunnels. People watched through binoculars from the sand dunes of Rafah, and they laughed for a month as the United States Army Corps of Engineers went to work. The Americans saw us, and though they left as uninterested as they had come, we were sure that our laughter floating across the border had unnerved them. As soon as they were gone, our boys went to work inside the tunnels with blowtorches, cutting through the metal that was meant to cut off our sustenance. It was a gift, really, because the underground wall was made of high-grade steel that we recycled into other things. We were used to being the losers, but this time we won. We outsmarted Israel, Egypt, and the great United States of America. Gaza was one big party for a while. Our newspapers published cartoons that showed Mubarak, Bush, and Netanyahu scratching their heads and their asses while we laughed from Rafah's sandy hills, holding what we had made from that excellent steel: car parts, playground equipment, building beams, and rockets. My teta Nazmiya said, "Allah have mercy and protect us. All this joy and laughter in Gaza is bound to bring blood and heartache. Light always casts shadows," she said. She must have been thinking of Maryam. It wasn't long after that when I went into the quiet blue, that place without time where I could soak up all the juices of life and let them run through me like a river. Then Noor came, her mouth full of Arabic words, that were sawed off and sanded at the edges with the curly accent of a foreigner. She came with all that American do-gooder enthusiasm that thinks it can fix broken people like me and heal wounded places like Gaza. But she was more shattered than any of us. And every night, when Noor put my sister Rachel to bed, Teta Nazmiya pulled the sky in place, and Mama embroidered in it the stars and moon. And in the morning, when Rachel awoke, she hung the sun. That's how it was when Noor came back. These were the women of my life, the songs of my soul. The men they loved were lost in one way or another, except me. I stayed as long as I could.
Very beautiful and also very inspiring story, Susan. That was great to hear. Well, that leaves me, and since I cannot ask myself any questions, I mean, I do all the time within my own head. It would look strange to do it in public. I'm just going to deliver a little monologue. This is my second book, Clouds, which just came out last month. My first one is called Arzi the Dwarf, and it's a story of a very little man in Bombay. He's only 3 foot 5 inches tall, and he works in an old cinema of Bombay. And he loves, what is unique about him is that he loves the darkness more than light, because when you're very small, you don't like being looked at if you're an adult human being. So when he walks down the streets of Bombay, he always feels, even when people look at him with some degree of empathy, he always wonders if there's something patronizing about that gaze. But if you're a projectionist in a cinema, there's this vast enveloping darkness in which you can get lost. And in a way, for him, the cinema is a kind of second body for him, where that darkness allows you to hide yourself. And also, you know, we've all been to cinemas. If you work as a projectionist, you're always above everyone else, and you direct the beam down from above the heads of people. So in a way, he gains height when he goes to work, and no one can look at him. And he has a double point of view on the world, one looking down at the city of Bombay from the window of the projectionist room, where no one can see him looking at them. And on the other side, he looks down into the vault of the cinema through this little shutter, and so he thinks of himself as the custodian of the great beam of the cinema. And the book is about 2 weeks in his life where he's always wanted to become head projectionist, and is that going to happen or not? And when I finished that, I was very excited because this is a question we should ask. I wonder if all of you like reading your own work. I must confess, you know, I do myself. I like reading my own books to see, and like, yeah. I'm sure you do. Some people don't even admit it, which I think is wrong. Be truthful. And I thought I would write something a bit bigger, and I think I come from a very complex society, and that's part of the joys of being a novelist in India. That, you know, you can just turn your gaze 5 degrees in another direction, and you see something else to write about. And one of the very nice things about Indian literature is that it, unlike most of the other literatures of the world, there's more than 20 major languages in the Indian literary tradition. And so not even the most well-read Indian writer knows more than a fraction of the country's literature, because so much else is in another language. And I thought I would like to write a double-sided book about new India and old India at the same time, and write 2 stories. And I've always loved clouds. I loved sitting and watching them float around in the sky. And I thought I would write a double-sided story in which, set in Bombay, which is the city I come from, in which clouds would be a metaphor in one side for a state of mind, and the other side there would be real clouds, and there's a religion based on clouds and a cloud god called Cloudmaker. But the bit I'm going to read from is, the book has 2 heroes. On this one side, which I'm going to read from, is a recently divorced psychotherapist called Farhad Bilimoria, who has decided that, you know, there's many kinds of love in India, but mostly it's youthful love. And people who get divorced, as recently they've tended to do, find it very hard to meet someone new again, because there isn't that sort of space in India to do so. And Farhad is tired of searching for love in his 40s in Bombay and is moving to San Francisco. But in the week in which we see him leaving, he meets a visiting lady from San Francisco in Bombay and decides to ask her if she wants to, because they're going to be living in the same city soon, if she wants to meet in Bombay. And this is his first date in 24 years, because he was married, he only hung out with his wife, and now he's starting all over again. He doesn't really know what to do. And I'm going to read 2 pages of their conversation. It's Farhad, and then Zara is the girl who's come to see him. Zara cut the call and, without breaking stride, smiled dazzlingly and said, Hello, Dr. Bilmoria. I must apologize for the rudeness. I was just clearing up something important. Oh no, I said. I'm sorry that you're so worked up. Zara said, I hope you don't think I'm a demon of some kind, just waiting to drag people to court. Who, me? I said, never. It's just that, she said, if you're a single woman in this world, you have to fight for your rights all the time. You're a therapist, you'll know. After a point, it's the world that makes us who we are. She was a single woman in this world. I was a single man in the very same world. So true, I said. Not at all. Good to see you. Is there some property dispute? Yes, said Zara. But let's forget it. It's not important. What I want to ask you is, you must know 1,000 things that most Indians don't know because of your work in therapy. All the deeper secrets of people. Isn't that true? I could tell you a few things that would surprise you. Yes, I said. There's something I wanted to ask you, Zara said. I've been thinking about it all day. Tell me, is there a lot of infidelity in Bombay? I said, but that depends on what you take as your base ground. Don't dodge now. Tell me. Yes, I said. More than you think. Much more. Wow, really? But I said, isn't that always the case with adultery? There's typically more of it than one thinks. It's meant to be a secret. That's what makes it exciting to everyone involved. Exciting, she said. Not for the ones who are being cheated on, surely. Unless they get together with each other, like that lead pair in the Mood for Love. Have you seen that film? Yes, I said. I love those scenes in slow motion, said Zara, where they go up the steps, all alone, carrying their noodle dinners. It's so romantic somehow, like they're actually together in their loneliness, only they can't see it because, of course, they don't know about each other yet. Anyway, what about incest in Bombay? Is there a lot of that? I was delighted by the free, frank, and low turn that the conversation was taking at Zara's own bidding. And I said in a whisper, shh, or in 2 minutes we're going to have everyone in this place sitting at our feet. Zara giggled. What a strange lot we Indians are, don't you think? I said, I'll confess, after years of study, I've come to the same conclusion. Only now, I'm bored of such strangeness. We don't actually want more freedom, as some people imagine we do. That would be so mundane. We'd rather have a world of piety and prohibition so we can preach morality to others, all the while trying to circumvent those very same rules. So lots of incest too. What a world. Zara whistled, an act that curiously became her the way priests can look their most charming when they run cassocked into a football game. Sorry if this is boring for you, Dr. Billy Moria. I'm just curious about these things because I've been away from India for so long and I want to know how our society is changing. And who better than you to know the secret life of the Indian mind? Thank you. Okay, we are at 3:25. Well done, everybody. I think we all sort of divided up perfectly right. I want to congratulate you all, both for your literary careers and for your performance this afternoon. Are we ready to finish, or do we have 5 minutes for... Yes, okay. So anybody who would like to ask a question to any of these good souls here, please do so. Yes, you, ma'am.
Mornings in Janine. Thank you for Mornings in Janine, one of the most incredible books I've ever read. I had to put it down several times in order to deal with my emotions, in order to get through it. I attended a program earlier in migrant words, and Professor Magdisi asked the writers, who do you write for? And I can't help but think about this regarding Mornings in Janine, when you wrote it. I find myself wanting everyone to read it, but who do you write for in this case?
So I make a deliberate decision. First of all, thank you hugely for reading Mornings in Jane, for your kind words. When I make a deliberate decision not to have any loyalty to my publisher, to the reader, to anybody except the characters. I try to write for the characters. I try my best to always stay focused on telling their story with authenticity, with honesty, and humanity. Inevitably these sort of questions of reader reactions will sort of creep into my mind. So it's something that I've had to, it's a skill that I had to kind of work on to develop. But I fully, sort of exclude them now. But the fact that I write in English, obviously I'm first writing for an audience that reads English. So I mean, that's sort of a top overview, but I don't write with a particular audience in mind, never. Yeah.
Someone else? Yes. And yes.
Sorry, we're coming.
This is bringing you over the mic.
Hi, thanks. It's very interesting to hear all of you speak, and since you didn't ask yourself, I will ask you.
Thank you so much.
How did you get into writing? What was your path?
Well, I happen to think, and I wonder what you guys think of this, that in art, jealousy is a very productive emotion. It's not negative. And when I was growing up, I would read all these books, and every now and then you read something truly wonderful, and you say, I want to be able to write like that. And it doesn't mean that you ever actually get to that point, but because you have that thought in your head, you start thinking about how to, what are the concrete ways in which you could approach this goal. And also, at some point I realized that India is changing very fast, and one of the best ways in which to be part of that story is actually to be witness to it in some ways. And what is great about the novel is that all of us have a local tradition, novels from our own society about the places that we know. And there's a big cosmopolitan tradition to which you can also belong to. And then you join up strands from these streams together, and you make your own world of narrative. And I've always felt, in a way, that, for a lot of, at least for me, it's not just that I write novels, but also novels have written me. They are who I am, and it's from reading them that I feel I have a sense of what people are like. That I can then bring to the actual sort of engagements with people. So all of these things, and also it's one of those things where as you get older, life doesn't get worse; it gets better usually. So for all of these reasons, yes. And I wanted to be a writer for some reasons 20 years ago, and new reasons keep popping up. Okay, and I think that's all that we have time for. I want to thank Monique, Edward, Susan, for great readings, and all of us are going to be in that little hall right after this for 10 minutes signing our books, so we urge you to spend plentifully. Bye-bye.